Callum Ridgway had always been a man who believed in the idea of love overcoming all obstacles. He thought his marriage to Marissa, after 7 years, was something to be proud of. The laughter they shared, the moments of comfort in silence, and the quiet assurance that they were partners in life. He had always believed these things would shield them from any storm. But everything changed the day he realized his greatest enemy was not anyone outside his marriage. It was his own silence. At first glance, Callum's life appeared to be solid. He had a wife he loved, a job he enjoyed fixing computers, and a life that seemed stable, if not a bit predictable. He was content in his routines, comfortable with the people he had around him. But there was one thing that gnawed at him, a sense that he didn't quite belong in Marissa's world. His in-laws, though polite, made him feel like a permanent outsider, as if he were a puzzle piece forced into a frame that didn't quite fit. The cracks in this seemingly perfect life began to show during a family reunion in New York. What started as a simple, innocent gathering would soon unravel the tension simmering just beneath the surface, exposing truths that Callum had been too afraid to confront. Callum had always felt like a fish out of water in Marissa's world. Raised in a working-class home where the focus was on getting by and supporting each other, he had learned to value hard work and practicality over wealth and status. But Marissa's family was different, steeped in old money and social standing. Her mother, Bali, and her older brother, Gregory, embodied the world of privilege, where lineage mattered more than character. They never fully accepted Callum, always making sure he knew he was an outsider in their high society bubble. Their cold stares were often followed by backhanded compliments or subtle insults wrapped in silk, leaving Callum feeling like he was always on the outside looking in. Every interaction, every smile from Boyle, every word from Gregory carried the weight of a judgment Callum couldn't quite shake. Despite his hesitation, Callum found himself attending the family reunion in New York. Marissa, ever the optimist, promised this time would be different. They'll be better, she insisted, but Callum knew better. Deep down, he recognized that no matter how hard he tried to fit in, he would never truly belong. Her family's disapproval was like a shadow he couldn't outrun, lingering just beyond the edges of every conversation. As they arrived at the family estate, Callum felt that all too familiar weight settle in his chest. He was a stranger in a house that wasn't his, surrounded by people who looked at him like he wasn't good enough. The walls of the grand estate felt even colder than they looked, and Callum's unease only deepened. The dinner at the family reunion was supposed to be a chance for Callum to show that he could fit in, that he could navigate the cold waters of Marissa's world. But it quickly became the final test of his patience. Surrounded by gleaming silverware, crystal glasses that caught the light just right, and conversations that were polite to the point of being stifling, Callum couldn't shake the feeling that he was invisible. The lavish setting, the pristine manners, it all served as a constant reminder of how out of place he was. When he decided to stand and offer a simple toast, hoping to connect with the family in a meaningful way, it quickly backfired. Gregory sneered at him, making a mockery of his words, while Belle, as always, had a cutting remark ready. "Such an impromptu speech," Blaise said coolly, her voice dripping with condescension. "It almost sounds like a tantrum." The words stung more than Callum cared to admit. His attempt at bridging the gap only seemed to widen the divide. As the tension in the room grew thicker, Callum felt something inside him snap. He had always been the quiet one, taking the insults, swallowing his pride, and trying to be the good husband. But tonight, something had shifted. When the evening ended and Marissa's family left him feeling small and worthless, the silent anger he'd kept hidden for so long began to crack. For the first time, he understood. No matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, he would never be accepted by them. The hurt he'd buried for years was too much to ignore any longer. The shell he'd built around it was starting to break. Back in their shared room, the weight of the evening finally broke Callum's resolve. He paced in front of the bed, frustration simmering in every step. He could no longer remain silent, no longer pretend that everything was fine. For the first time in their marriage, he turned to Marissa and confronted her. His voice, though steady, carried the years of quiet suffering. "I can't keep doing this, Marissa," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a rawness he had never allowed himself to show. "I've been silent for too long, and I'm tired. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when your family treats me like I don't belong. It's exhausting, and I'm done being an outsider in my own marriage." Marissa's reaction was swift and dismissive. She didn't even look at him directly. "Oh, Callum, you're overreacting. They were just joking. You're way too sensitive. Don't make a scene." Her words hit harder than any insult from her family ever could. Callum stared at her, his stomach sinking. She wasn't listening. She wasn't standing with him. She was brushing him off, just like they all did. A wave of anger surged through him, but he fought to keep it in check. "You need to stand up for me. You need to tell them that it's not okay." Instead of understanding, she gave him an ultimatum. Apologize for making this a big deal, or leave. The coldness in her voice cut through him, and in that moment, Callum knew the truth. He couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. He had reached the breaking point. The air in the room felt thick with tension, but Callum's decision was clear. He wasn't going to apologize. Instead, he turned toward the closet, pulling his bag from the shelf, his movements slow but deliberate. Each item he packed was a silent declaration of what he had just realized, that he could no longer stay in a marriage where his worth was constantly questioned, where his voice was dismissed as irrelevant. He had given so much of himself, trying to fit into a life that wasn't his, trying to be the man Marissa wanted him to be. But he couldn't keep pretending any longer. As he zipped up his bag, the weight of the moment settled over him. Marissa stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face pale. She didn't try to stop him. She simply asked, her voice trembling, "Are you really doing this?" Callum didn't respond immediately. He just grabbed his bag, his heart pounding in his chest. The question hung in the air, but there was nothing left to say. He turned and walked toward the door, Marissa's silent gaze on his back. As he stepped into the hallway, he felt the finality of his choice. There was no going back. He was leaving behind everything he had known, everything he had tried to make work. He didn't know where he would go or what the future held, but one thing was certain: he was done. The life he had once built was no longer his, and it was time to start over. Callum's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he pulled away from the family estate, the headlights of his truck cutting through the quiet darkness. He didn't look back. The silence of the night was deafening, but with each mile he put between himself and Marissa's world, the weight of his decision began to lift. What had felt like an impossible choice just hours before now felt like a release, a breath of air after being submerged for far too long. For the first time in years, Callum felt something close to relief. 2 hours into the drive, he spotted a small, inconspicuous airport on the side of the road. Something about it called to him. Maybe it was the desire to escape. Maybe it was the impulse to start fresh. Without thinking, he pulled into the parking lot and walked inside. After a few moments of hesitation, he approached the counter and, on a whim, bought a one-way ticket to Oregon. It was far from New York, far from Marissa, and far from the suffocating expectations of her family. Oregon felt like the other side of the world, a place where he could rebuild. As he boarded the plane, a wave of freedom washed over him. There were no eyes watching him, no judgments, no expectations. For the first time in a long time, Callum felt like he could finally breathe. The flight to Oregon was not just a physical journey. It was the start of something new, a blank page where he could rewrite his story. After landing in Oregon, Callum felt an odd sense of disconnection from everything he'd known. The airport was small, and as he rented a car and drove toward the coast, there was no map, no itinerary, just a vague feeling that he needed to be far away from the life he'd left behind. The vast open landscape of Oregon, with its towering trees and rolling hills, stretched before him like a canvas, empty yet full of possibility. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where he could start anew without the weight of expectations bearing down on him. By the time he reached the coast, the salty air mixed with the scent of pine and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled his ears. Callum found a small, inexpensive motel nestled near the beach and checked in without hesitation. The room was simple, but the peace it offered was beyond anything he'd felt in years. The ocean's rhythm soothed his restless mind, and for the first time in a long time, he could breathe without feeling stifled by the ghosts of his past. The next day, he rented a modest studio apartment in a nearby coastal town. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. No one to judge him, no one to expect anything from him. It was a place where he could share the person he had been trying so hard to please others with, and finally start being the person he truly was. Over the next few days, Callum began to settle into his new life. Each morning, he took long walks along the beach, letting the cool ocean breeze wash over him. He spent hours in the quiet, charming town, savoring the calm pace of life. There was no one here to judge him, no one to demand anything from him. No Marissa, no family, no expectations. Just peace. The weight that had always pressed down on him began to lift, and with each passing day, he felt lighter, more like himself than he had in years. As he sat on the porch of his small studio, looking out over the waves, Callum reflected on the life he had left behind. For so many years, he had bent himself to fit into a mold that was never meant for him. He had tried to make a life with Marissa, to live up to the impossible standards of a family, all while suppressing his own needs and desires. It had never been about him. It had always been about what others wanted. Now, in Oregon, he had the chance to reinvent himself. He could build a life that was entirely his own, rooted in his own values, free from the constraints of the past. In the stillness of his new home, Callum realized that he had made the right choice. He was no longer trapped in the world of judgment and expectation. For the first time in years, Callum Ridgway was truly free. Callum's decision to leave behind everything he knew wasn't just about escaping Marissa or her family. It was about choosing himself over the life that had slowly suffocated him. For years, he had sacrificed his own needs, his own voice, for the sake of others. But now, in this quiet coastal town, he had finally chosen freedom. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he understood that it was his to decide. As he stood by the waves, the ocean stretching endlessly before him, Callum felt a sense of peace settle deep within. Leaving wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of something entirely new. The weight of the past no longer defined him. He was no longer the man who tried to fit into a mold that never fit, no longer the one who remained silent for the sake of others. The world was wide open, and Callum was ready to embrace it on his own terms. For the first time in years, he felt the freedom to be whoever he wanted to be, to live however he chose. There was no looking back now. This was his life, and he was finally ready to live it.